Hello, it's Joanne Cleaver here with the 2020 Accounting Move Project Report. I'm so glad to be able to present to you folks the results of the 2020 report, in which we took a deep dive at some of the most interesting dynamics that enable women to deliver results for themselves and for their firms. We explored some of the emerging dynamics that are connecting women through informal and formal channels at their firms. And we discovered some really terrific trends that I think are going to excite you and encourage you to find new ways to mentor women, to find new directions for your own career, and potentially even inspire some new directions for you to pursue firm ownership. So who is this? This is not me. You know me. I'm Joanne Cleaver. I'm the person who runs the Accounting Move Project in collaboration and partnership with the Accounting and Financial Women's Alliance, and thank you for this ongoing collaboration. Um, this is not me. This is a gal who's having way more fun than probably any of us have ever had in 2020. She's really into it. This is the popular notion of what the pot industry is all about, the cannabis industry. But here's the thing. In the process, sorry, of exploring the 2020 Accounting Move Project report, we discovered that cannabis actually offered up a perfect case study for many of the things that women are doing to drive firm results. So this gal, the prior gal, is what we all think of when we think of cannabis. But cannabis, as most of you know, is actually a really thriving business, very corporate these days. And a lot of states, especially states that are having a lot of issues with revenue, which seemed to be every state at the beginning of this year, now is definitely every state. A lot of states are looking at licensing different types of cannabis operations and essentially formalizing the entire industry from the crazy, pothead sort of image to a real business in which the actual product of cannabis and all of its derivatives essentially becomes like producing any other agricultural commodity, right? So it's not so much the corn, it's the corn starch, it's the corn syrup, it's all the things you can get from corn. And Raymond, which is a firm that has been a stalwart Move Project participant, Raymond is based in Michigan. Michigan needs money. Raymond realized, oh, if Michigan needs money and they're going to start loosening up the prior restraints on cannabis as an industry and as a product, and structuring new ways for this industry to grow, that means that they're going to need standards. Standards mean accounting. We are accountants. We should get in on this. And it was so much fun to discover that within Raymond, one particular woman, Chris Singh, realized, oh, wait a minute, I know some people who are starting to be movers and shakers in this industry. If Raymond is willing to go out there ahead of everybody else and get going with this industry, we would have first mover advantage. And that is what they did. So when Raymond realized that cannabis was moving from the pot shop, at the side street to actual Main Street, they very quickly formed an alliance with the brand new Association for Michigan, the Michigan cannabis industry. And because Chris Singh is so great at developing relationships, which is based on her long standing at Raymond and other practices that she's built, she was able to work behind the scenes with the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association and get Raymond in as kind of the standard bearer, helping to create the terms of the discussion for accounting, accountability. What are these corporate structures that need to be unique to this new industry? What are the corporate structures that we can transfer over from what everybody else does? And they didn't, this is a risk for Raymond. I mean, it was a little bit of a reputational risk because, as with any new industry, everyone's figuring out, well, is it really worth it? But Raymond thought, you know what? We're going to get into this thing on a short-term basis. If this new industry takes the arc that we think it will, it's basically there's going to be a ton of investment, there's going to be private equity, there are going to be companies getting into cannabis for the exact purpose of figuring out all the derivatives of the basic product as a commodity, and then they're going to sell, they're going to get out, they're going to sell to pharmaceuticals, they're going to sell to food processing companies, they're going to sell to new conglomerates that will come along expressly for the purpose of making the most of the cannabis industry. So that's what Raymond had in mind. That was a couple years ago. And this is playing out beautifully. Raymond is actually literally setting the terms for success for this entire industry. And one of the reasons why it's doing so well is because they were willing to let Chris Singh take the lead. So when the Accounting Move Project took a look in 2020 at what some of the key dynamics are that are resulting in women actually leading new business, we had some pretty interesting discussions with firms that said, Move Project, maybe you're putting the cart before the horse. We do a lot of new business development. It's not just about women, men do it too, to which we at the Move Project said, yes, we know. And then when we sat down for the interviews, firms said, okay, so we actually sat down and did a nose count of who's being most productive and most innovative, who's fastest to identify and lead new opportunities. And we're finding at our firms that it is the majority of these new business lines of business that are developing are coming from women. What is going on? There's something really happening here. So um, that is what the report is about. And just for a quick little bit of background for folks who may not be as familiar with the MOVE project, MOVE measures results, not just programs and intentions. The entire concept of the MOVE project is to take a look at the key dynamics that drive long-term sustainable success for women in the profession and for CPA firms. And I'll get into the details in a few minutes about exactly what some of those drivers are. But the key thing to know now is that the MOVE project does not just count up a whole bunch of programs. You cannot land on the Accounting and Financial Women's Alliance Best Firms for Women list just by having a long list of things that you do for women. You can't get on that list just by having potlucks and book clubs and women's initiatives, as beautiful as they might be. We look in the MOVE project for actual results for a statistical change in the presence of women in leadership and in the leadership pipeline. We want to see programs that are effective, but we want to see a continual upward spiral of success so that it's not just companies or firms putting out a bunch of programs and saying, look at all the good we do, while the women are saying to each other in the ladies' room, really? Because that's not been my experience here. Our goal is to break that logjam and to show what works so that firms can continue to invest in the programs that work and so that women can invest their careers and their lives with the firms that are actually on their side and that are actually delivering those results for them. The MOVE project would not exist without founding sponsor Moss Adams, which helped us get it off the ground in 2010 and has been with us ever since. And the MOVE project would not exist without CohnReznick, which is the national sponsor, which came in a few years ago. And of course, the AFWA has been a pillar of the MOVE project since its beginning. We wouldn't exist without the AFWA partnership. My firm, Wilson Taylor Associates, is a content and research firm. My background is as a business journalist, and so I love stories like the one about Chris Singh and Raymond discovering that they had the potential for a fast start and industry dominance in a brand new industry right away, and that it was a woman who had built a prior practice for them that was qualified to lead that charge. That's the kind of story that I've been covering for national publications for almost 4 decades. And the MOVE project has been a career highlight for me because we bring my team of researchers, former business journalists, a graphic designer, and so on. We bring journalistic standards and process to the research. So we don't just throw out there a survey and get a bunch of collected results. We don't just get a bunch of self-reported comments as do other projects which shall go unnamed. But we actually do real interviews. We want to understand what's not being said. We want to find out what the dots are and connect those dots. And the AFWA graciously gives us insight and input into what the themes are, helps us with a reality check. The founding sponsor and national sponsor also do a lot of guidance, helping us ensure that the terminology and the themes that we're coming up with will actually resonate with you folks, with the entire profession, and that this will be a useful report. The Best Firms for Women list and the Best Firms for Equity Leadership are based on MOVE project results. So Best Firms for Women is designed to recognize firms that have that magic combination of excellent programs that are always improving with statistical advancement of women So we don't just say, hey, you've got a greater women's initiative, too bad your numbers never move. We want to see for a larger firm that their initiatives and programs directly result in the retention and advancement of women. But the best firms for equity leadership recognizes that there's way more than one way to advance women at a firm. The equity leadership list is literally about 30% of uh, women in partners and principals. That's the cutoff. We don't care how you get there. We're agnostic as to result, as to process. We're just looking at the result. And that list actually came about a couple of years into the MOVE project when some medium-sized and local firms were saying, hey, we're really good at advancing women. We don't have a bunch of programs because we didn't need to fix stuff because we didn't screw it up to begin with. So maybe there's a way to recognize us for not dropping the ball to begin with. So the equity leadership list is just all about that, roughly that 30%. And the best firms list is for larger firms, and it looks at that magic combination of continual improvement through programs and results, and then reinvesting in programs to be able to get to that 30%. There are a few firms that are on both, but not many. So 30%, this is a good time, a good moment to pause and just take a look at one of those questions I know you guys have to answer for CPE. What is it? Why 30%? For 30% is like the magic number for advancing women, but why is that? Well, academic research indicates that roughly at 30%, 30 to 33% is the point at which women or any minority group in a larger group are suddenly perceived as representing their own expertise and it's speaking on their own as opposed to representing the women's point of view or the Black point of view or the Hispanic point of view or whatever it might be. So that 30% is an essential number. It's a tipping point, widely considered on corporate boards, in corporate leadership, for any group. Um, when a presence of a clearly identified minority is less than 30%, then that person generally is kind of pigeonholed as representing the overall group. And so that 30% is important. Okay, women to the fore. Now let's get into some of the really fun stuff that we saw in our 2020 report. We wanted to understand how women were driving innovation. We had a sense that some of these often taken for granted characteristics that women have had at CPA firms forever were actually kind of secret bullets or secret weapons for gaining new business. So a perfect example is client retention. We have heard over and over again that women were great at client retention. And in fact, sometimes this actually worked against women because sometimes we heard that women would actually prefer to, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, that sometimes we would hear that women would actually prefer to kind of self-plateau and not do a lot of greenfield business development, not going to all those events and trying to come up with brand new clients, because they just wanted to work with the book of business that they had, and that women were great at cultivating relationships and really great at holding on to clients, and that should be their groove. So sometimes, not at all firms and not at all times and not all women, but there is a tendency, there is a pattern for women in midlife when they have a lot of responsibilities to their families and they're also looking at what it takes to become a partner to say, I'm not going to upset this apple cart. I do have a book of clients that I like. I'm going to work on cross-selling them. I'm going to work on holding on to these clients and see what skills I can gain in terms of business development. And then when it's time to accelerate to partner, that's when I'll worry about going out there and I guess endless rounds of golf or something. But that's when I'll worry about trying to bring in those brand new clients that are 100% new to the firm. Well, guess what? It turns out that in situations like if you're going after the cannabis industry, it's internal referrals that actually seed new business. It's internal referrals that get you that first one or two clients that create the new practice. And when we started to look at how women handle or translate client retention to getting new business, this is a light bulb moment for the firms that we interviewed because they were like, oh, that does happen. We just hadn't quite put our finger on it, but oh, now that we see that that happens, we're definitely going to double down and concentrate on that so that we can make sure it happens more and more. So, in the process of participating in the MOVE project, a number of firms had these light bulb moments and they realized that they were doing something right. And if they deliberately cultivated those skills of converting client retention to seeding new practices with those clients because of those internal referrals, they would actually equip women with skills for partnership and business development in a new way. And they would be counting those women's contributions in new ways as well. Instead of taking women for granted because they were holding on to clients and then kind of cherry picking those clients for new business, to seed new practices or new offices, if you take a deliberate approach to that, you've got women actually driving measurable new new revenue. And that was a really great moment. We were so happy to be part of those discussions at those firms. And even the women themselves, as we were several women, as we were talking to them about how this has worked out for them, they hadn't even quite crystallized that this was a dynamic. So this is one, just on this one point alone, to be honest, I think the 2020 Accounting Move Project report would have justified itself, because everyone loved this point and everyone realized that this was something that they could really build some programs around and be much more deliberate about. So CohnReznick, which has been the national sponsor of the Accounting Move Project for the last 6 years, CohnReznick actually had taken this even a step further. They had acquired a small consulting practice. And one of the people that they acquired was a woman who turned out to be really awesome at internal referrals. And she had her own system. Her own system was so good at doing internal interviews, with as she got to know the other folks in CohnReznick as her new firm. She did this series of like structured interviews. She was very deliberate about researching what the different practices did and seeing how it intersected with her practice to get one, add one and one and get three. And so she was so effective at quickly ramping up and drawing in new clients because of this method she had developed that CohnReznick actually had her do a formal program through its women's initiative, Women Can, to encourage other women to use this technique as well. So a little bit of self-awareness goes a really, really long way when it comes to what women are already doing right. In a similar vein, a lot of firms are finding, and this, we did this research in December, January, and February 2020. So in the old days, before it all hit the fan. So a lot of what you'll be hearing in this presentation is even more relevant now. And the whole notion of short-term rotations fits into that. So short-term rotations are something, the concept has been around in corporate America for a long time. It's basically the idea of having, project teams that are designed to have to work on a short-term project, very focused, quick in, quick out, measurable results, take advantage of something that's just popped up, or tackle a very specific problem for a client or a very specific market opportunity. So the idea is that you would be rotated into these short-term rotations to gain experience with a new type, with folks that you don't normally work with. Maybe if you're an accountant in a corporate setting, you might work with marketing. Maybe if you're marketing, you work with accounting. But also to gain new skills, like maybe if you've been have hesitated to do presentation skills, the short-term rotation is a lower pressure, self-limiting risk opportunity to tackle some skills that might feel like they were too much or just kind of an overwhelming learning curve in the course of everyday life. So short-term rotations have been increasingly popular in corporate America, but they have not been an easy fit with accounting firms. And that's because the accounting firms, for many of them, the workflow is driven by the tax season, by regulations. I get it. It's driven by things that are bigger than y'all. You got to do it. I understand the tyranny of the 15th. I get it. But that also means that it has been kind of an artificial damper on some of these, the idea of working on these short-term rotations. Now, a lot of firms have been able to work around, kind of that deadline and the hardwired cycle of work for firms, for the accounting function. But some firms have used that as, the work cycle as kind of an excuse to not really get engaged in this particular dynamic. But here's what we're finding. More and more firms are saying, no, we've got to expose people to more people within the firm. Nobody can afford to be isolated or stuck in a silo. And if you're not going to do a longer term rotation, because maybe you can't afford to take that person away from their tax practice, for a very long time, you certainly can do it when there are no tax deadlines looming. And you get a lot of insight into quick breaking opportunities. So for women who are looking to get quick bites of meaningful experience, because that synchronizes really well with the workload that they have, especially if they're balancing personal and family obligations. Um, these short-term rotations are invaluable. So we're finding that firms are taking more and more advantage of this trend. And the short-term rotations could be 6 months to 2 years. Some of them are much shorter, but 6 months to 2 years seems to be roughly the parameters. And they're very, very focused. You're looking for quick in, quick out, and measurable results. Women's initiatives are actually rising to be a much more strategic tool than they have in the past. And we've always been a fan of women's initiatives at the MOVE Project. We think they're great. We also want to see real results. What we don't want to see is a women's initiative that's a barely disguised book club or opportunity for manicures. I mean, we're all about the manicures, but please don't mix business development and manicures. Let's do one or the other and do it right. So women's initiatives, when you combine them with these first two trends of really seeing the internal referrals in a fresh way, and knowing that women are especially good at that, and the drive for short-term rotations, suddenly women's initiatives become an invaluable asset for achieving through the client retention and internal seeding and the short-term rotations. And here's how this works. If you're putting together a team that's deliberately diverse, you've got a new project team, it's going to tackle something for 6 months, and you don't want just the same old, same old. You want everybody on that team to experience new people, to have genuinely new experiences. Then the women's initiative, chapter leaders, or however it is structured, those are the folks who can say, you know what? We've got a couple of new folks who've been involved in our chapter or in our office, and they're really needing this type of experience that the short-term rotation could offer. Or so-and-so might be awesome at this one thing. Let's give her a chance to kind of stretch her wings and see if she's really good at it. So senior leaders are increasingly turning to women's initiatives for nominations for up-and-coming talent. So yes, they're looking for talent rising through the traditional partnership pipeline, but women's initiatives are kind of coming in through the side with with recommendations for how women can fit into these new practice development with bringing in or cross seeding a book of business and these short-term rotations. And all of this cycles up into the notion of a rapid response team, which is something that several firms, including Moss Adams, one of our sponsors, are doing quite a bit. So a rapid response team would say, well, a perfect example is right now, here we are in the middle of COVID. There's all kinds of chaos being thrown into accounting firms' clients' operations. Companies are finding unexpected growth or unexpected, chaos and devastation. All of that means that if you're serving those clients, you've got to get a different set of skills, a different set of personalities, and a different set of thinking. You've got to have diverse teams to deal with these crazy situations. And when women's initiatives can prove their value by bringing talent that might have been overlooked, that proves to be exactly what that assignment needed, then that just cycles back again to validate the importance and the investment in the women's initiative. So one of my favorite discoveries for the 2020 Accounting Move Project report was how that baby boomer women are kind of getting I don't want to say revenge, but 20, 25 years ago when they felt a little bit forced out of that firm that just couldn't find it in its heart to give them a little more maternity leave or a flexible schedule. And those baby boomer women said, well, okay, then I'll just go out on my own. I'll start my own firm. Guess who's getting bought? Guess who's getting acquired? And guess who's getting a premium for it? Now, we addressed a couple of years ago in the Public Accounting Report special section that we've done for most of this project, the whole issue of whether or not there's a gender dividend or a gender premium, really, when a big firm is buying a small firm, a boutique firm that has a significant proportion of women founders and partners. And our answer was yes, but we were asking the question very early. Well, there's no question now. We encountered several firms that have recently acquired firms started by women, baby boomers. Those women grew their firms, they cultivated their reputations, and they were able to sell back to either the same firm or a very similar firm that they had left 2 decades ago for a pretty good buck, which was, I gotta tell you, as a baby boomer woman, it felt pretty good. So one of the reasons why they're very attractive to these acquiring firms is because firms like BPM and Eide Bailly do not want to dilute the proportion of women leaders that they have. They're working really hard to gain and advance women in their leadership pipeline. And what they don't want is to be making acquisitions that keep resetting the clock and keep diluting the proportion of women leaders. We have a few firms in the Accounting Move project that are really struggling with that dynamic. And it's very frustrating for everybody when they'll say, well, we want to make a strategic acquisition, but if we do that, just FYI, we're going to plateau again for another year with our proportion of women leaders. So that's an issue, and I don't think it's a tip factor. I think that if a strategic acquisition is compelling enough, that a firm will still buy that firm, but it really, really sweetens the pot, and women business owners, women firm owners are in a very nice spot right now because that is one thing that they bring to the table, the very thing that made them leave the table a few years ago. Okay, so I promised to go back and kind of review some of the basics about the MOVE project. And of course, we measure results every year, and that's super important because you don't know if you're going anywhere unless you've actually measured your results. So the MOVE project looks at 4 dynamics that are proven to drive sustained advancement for women in the profession, really in any corporate setting, any workplace setting. The first is money, pay equity. Now, we've been talking about pay equity the entire time we've been doing the MOVE project, and it's kind of nice to see the world come in our direction. As you know, a lot of celebrities have decided 2 or 3 years ago that pay equity was going to be a big deal to them. They're going to start talking a lot about it, which is awesome that they've seen the light. But we've been talking about it the whole time. We're finding still incremental progress in terms of internal pay analysis and equity. We're finding that firms are talking more openly about pay equity, but we're also finding that firms are still hesitating to tie actual performance metrics of their partners to, the actual advancement of women to partners' pay. So firms are doing a lot of research. They're continuing to do a lot of benchmarking. They are forced in some cases, in many cases actually, to take a serious look at how they make initial pay offers because a number of states, Massachusetts, California, and others, are requiring employers to not ask to, they're barring them from asking about prior salary requirements at the point of hire. And the reason why that's important is that if women have been paid less than male peers at a prior job, basing a new job's pay on the prior job just perpetuates the inequity. So the point of hire, according to these state legislators, should be a moment of a clean slate. Now, there are some firms in the MOVE project that have very consistently said, you know what, we never asked about prior pay because for certain titles we have a very set pay. There's a very narrow range for negotiation, and we're all for negotiation. But the fact of the matter is that in our culture, negotiation for pay especially does tend to be a male-dominated dynamic where men will say, "Why shouldn't I get more?" Where women tend to say, that looks like a good offer, and according to my research, that's within the ballpark, so I'm good with it. Thank you very much. I'll start in 2 weeks. And firms are not going to negotiate against themselves. They're not going to insist on paying you more when you actually, are probably okay with paying less. But at the same time, they don't want to be party anymore. There's a growing level of unease with being a party to this sort of I'll take everything on the table type of mentality. So the way around that is to say, here's a narrow pay band for this particular title. And if you think you want to make an offer that differs from that, you better really justify that because this really is it. And oftentimes, firms are finding when they go back and look, people who come in with an attitude that they're going to, take everything that's on the table and maybe a little bit of somebody else's as well, they really actually don't get the results that the firm had hoped because that attitude doesn't really play very well for negotiating with clients. It's not a good way to advocate for your team because it's very zero sum. And it's not a cultural attribute that most firms want to replicate. So while I would hesitate to say that there's a wholesale rejection of hard-nosed negotiating, I do think it's fair to say that firms are much more nuanced these days about pay. They're trying to understand these underlying dynamics and the moving parts much more carefully. So in the MOVE project, opportunity is leadership development. We look at the partnership pipeline. We want to understand where women are in the partnership pipeline. I'll cycle back to that in a few minutes. V is vital supports her work life. So this has always been important to us. When we started the MOVE project, and one of the reasons why my team approached the AFWA way back in 2010 to see if we could get this project off the ground, is because at the time, accounting firms are actually pretty progressive. I know, don't laugh. We're actually pretty progressive in terms of childcare credits, elder care. Accounting firms were in the lead in terms of remote work. Well, that plateaued, for better or for worse. The rest of corporate America caught up. And as you know, there's been a rather significant burst in remote work in the last 6 months. Accounting firms have always been well positioned to make that transition. And a lot of really big employers have gradually, incrementally, slowly been allowing remote work until all of a sudden, bam, in March 2020, it was either let everybody work from home or you're out of business. And all of a sudden they found it wasn't that hard after all. So I'd argue that for all the travails that accounting firms have had in 2020, the actual transition to remote work has been a cultural and functional advantage. Firms, fortunately, had the groove, knew how to do it, knew that you needed, a tech person to be on, 24/7 call to back people up. Accountants are comfortable, especially on deadline, with managing their personal responsibilities and working in chunks, from home or from a remote office. So I realize that this has been a very hard year on accounting firms, but at least that's one thing where your profession has a very deep advantage and a deep level of trust and an understanding of functional collaboration that a lot of organizations had to struggle through to get there. I think the challenge now going forward is for accounting firms to say, well, how can we make the most of this? There's still a sense in this country that everybody is kind of in it together in terms of responding to COVID and what remote looks like. The bigger discussions are starting to happen in terms of do we go back to the office? What is an office? What does collaboration look like? How do we recognize and measure by results when we're all distributed in our own houses and aren't collaborating side by side, quite literally? What does a hybrid office look like? Is that worth the effort and the potential exposure? How much money do we put into infrastructure? All these questions are being asked. So I think that there is an opportunity for your firms, if you have points of excellence, to take the lead with clients and say, we're all struggling with this, but guess what? Our profession actually is pretty good at this. So here's some things that we didn't have to figure out. I just think it's an opportunity, especially when working with women clients, to be able to say, and to build that relationship, maybe a little harder to do, especially these days when we're also tired of working from home, but to build that relationship and say, how is this working out for you guys? How exactly, what from our experience can we share? Is there anything that about how we operate or about some of the problems that we solved so long ago that we haven't even thought about those particular challenges in a while? Maybe those could be resurrected as learning points for clients that are still kind of sorting their way through this. So work-life issues have come to the fore, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, but work-life issues have really come to the fore in this year, and accounting firms do have some inherent strengths with that. I think that the challenge for firms going forward with work life is to be very deliberate and to invest in aspects of work life culture virtual work life culture, so that they continue to advance women. Because it's really, the storyline is already coming out that it's a women's recession. And this is a moment where accounting firms can choose not to coast on their traditional strength of being good at remote work, but say, you know what? We navigated a few things pretty well. These are some ways that it could work for you too. And your business community, your clients, they want to hear that stuff. They want to know what's working. Everybody's hungry for solutions right now. So the MOVE project finally takes a qualitative look at entrepreneurship and business development. When we do corporate projects as the MOVE team, as we do more than just the accounting project. When we do corporate work, we look at entrepreneurship and supplier development. But for accounting firms, we look at business development. We want to understand how firms are specifically equipping women to qualify as partner. What kind of operational experience, profit and loss experience, practice development and experience, and business development experience are women getting so that they can qualify for partner? These are all light bulb moments for firms. When we show how there's an interplay between the M, the O, the V, and the E. And as the MOVE project has evolved over the last 10 years, we've been able to be more and more instructive with firms through the confidential reports that they get from us, where we say, your retention of women is kind of low at this one point. And actually, we think if you had more frank discussions about the interplay of pay equity and some of the work-life benefits and kind of qualified those and broke those out, you might be able to have a kind of discussion that would make a better case for women at this particular stage, typically manager, to stay the course. So we try to give our firms light bulb moments in the process of actually reporting out and doing the research for the report. So here are the numbers. We know you always look forward to these. We are kind of plateaued at the moment, but at a really, really good place for women on firm management committees. So the firm management committee would be the C-level, in a company, the CEO, et cetera. 32, 33%, that's not a significant difference from last year. And this is at that tipping point that I mentioned a little while ago, where women don't have to be defensive about being women, where women can just speak on the strengths of their own experience, their own insight, their own recommendations when they represent roughly at least a third of the group. So it's great that this is holding. Every year we have a slightly different mix of firms. So this is a bigger trend. This isn't just the same firms reporting the same stuff. This is a bigger trend that's starting to take hold. And I would also add that for firms that are, again, looking to build credibility in their communities, the whole notion of accountability and transparency, this is what people are looking at. They want to know, if you don't have a significant proportion of women in leadership, well, why is that? I mean, you no longer get extra credit for advancing women. You get demerits for not advancing women. So when the perspective of the business community shifts from goody for you to, okay, what have you done for me lately in terms of advancing women? This is where you want to be. You want to have these robust numbers, because from here it only gets better. Not quite there for women partners and principals. We didn't see the dramatic lift that we did with women advancing to the management committee, but we do see this steady growth. We're within shooting distance of women achieving that kind of magic 30, 33% tipping point. 29% is really, really good. And considering that back when we started the Accounting MOVE project, it was 18%, and as recently as 2014, we had essentially plateaued there, we're definitely starting to see some liftoff. Now, you could argue that part of this is just demographics, but I think firms are being much more cognizant of what they lose when a woman says, I just don't think partnership is for me. People are no longer saying, "Oh, okay, it's not for you. Then have a nice life." I think that firms are finding new ways to come back and continue that discussion and say, "Well, what is it that you see that you think isn't for you? Why do you not see yourself as a partner? What is your definition of partner?" And we're I mean, the level of self awareness varies, of course, by firm to firm and person to person. But I do think that there's starting to be a general sense that maybe we as partners could change what partnership is about a little bit instead of just expect women to kind of grow into this cookie cutter that we've got. So the conversation is starting to be a little more nuanced, a little more two-way. And I think women also are pushing back a bit more. We're hearing more and more stories of women saying, "I was on the verge of leaving, and I thought instead of leaving, I should tell them I'm on the verge of leaving." And they were able to salvage their progress to partnership, and the firm salvaged them as a valued partner. And so those conversations are starting to happen. A little vulnerability is going a long ways. Women senior managers, this is kind of stuck. It's been here for a long time. So the good news is that with very little variation in the proportion of women as senior managers, that means we're actually retaining more women to the partnership level. But women are 50 to 52%, depending on your survey, of all employees at accounting firms. So women as senior managers being plateaued here just below that 50% level, it's okay. We'd still like to see better retention, obviously, to partner. Um, and the main message that we're giving firms these days is do not have the partnership conversation at the senior manager level. You have to start with women when they're associates. Well, welcome to 2020. Here it is. It's October. Yeah, this is what it looks like for all of us. And the MOVE project has certainly gone through its changes in 2020 as well. So we are taking advantage of the fact that a lot of things are different. And we are going to be looking at some serious resets not for the core mission of the MOVE project, but more for how we go about accomplishing it. So here's what we're discussing, and we would love your input. We very much would like to have your input on this. Unfortunately, we lost our publishing partner. As you know, for the last 8 years, well, from ending last year as it turned out in 2019, we had a publishing partnership with Public Accounting Report. And we would produce an executive summary of the MOVE project report for them and gave it to them to publish as their May issue. And that was wonderful for our sponsors and for the AFWA because it meant that there's guaranteed coverage and exposure of the MOVE project report and the AFWA's advocacy for women through Public Accounting Report guaranteed every May. Well, they don't have Public Accounting Report anymore. Wolters Kluwer just sort of shut it down, and we never even officially got told that it was being shut down. It just kind of didn't happen. So that was very confusing. We were all ready to go. We had our copy all ready to go, and then the editor just wasn't there anymore, and it just wasn't happening. So, okay. We took a step back. We've spent some time talking with you folks and with our sponsors, and we realized, wait a minute, this is an opportunity to synchronize the release of the MOVE project report to a timeline that could be actually more beneficial to the profession. We were very much stuck with the May release date because that's when we were hardwired into the Public Accounting Report publishing schedule. But if we don't have to worry about that, we can put it out whenever we want. So we're in a process now of talking with some potential new sponsors, talking with you folks. Cindy's been great, Mary's been great, bouncing around these ideas and considering putting the report out in October in sync with your conference. That actually would be a better time for the talent staff at the firms that use the MOVE project report, which is a lot of firms, more firms than participate use it. I keep learning. But that's the hiring season, and it's a really good moment for sponsors to be able to assert their advocacy for women in affiliation with the project in the report if it comes out when people are very aware of hiring. So that's one thing we're thinking about. We would love your input on that. We are in the process of talking with a potential new publishing partner. The publishing partner will probably look very different from Public Accounting Report. The nature of publishing has changed a lot, and our opportunities and what that partnership would look like are likely to look very different. But we feel that it's important to have an ongoing relationship with a publisher, most likely digital, that understands the value of what we bring, that wants the quality of research that they can only get from the MOVE project report, and that frankly wants a little bit of the halo that they get from the AFWA to be able to, show that they get it, they're putting out good information to their readers. Um, and, publishing companies are under a lot of financial pressure. They probably can't afford to just do it from scratch on their own. So we're looking for that strategic relationship. We're also looking or considering reformatting the report. So twice we've come out with diversity reports that were separate. They were based on ongoing MOVE project demographic results, but the diversity reports were sponsored independently and published off cycle. And we were really proud of those reports. We felt that we got really good insights, but we also learned a lot. One of the things we learned is that there are not as many synergies and there's not as much transferable information from like starting a women's initiative to starting, say, a employee resource group for gay and lesbians or blacks or whatever. Starting different groups like that may or may not follow in the same footsteps as starting a women's initiative. So there are some similarities and synergies, but there also are some very distinct modes of developing diversity programs, and measuring diversity results. We've collected diversity results the whole time we've been doing the MOVE project. So we were able, when we found sponsors, to rally and do those reports with the research that we already had. But the discussion has changed in corporate America, in America overall. The importance of diversity, the importance of accountability cannot be underestimated. So we're seriously considering doing the report structured into 3 parallel pillars, if you will. One focusing just on women, one on diverse talent, which would primarily be defined as minority and ethnic diversity, although we do measure the awareness and kind of the advocacy for other types of employees or other identities through the presence of employee resource groups. So at firms that have an LGBTQ group, we don't ask them how many of your employees identify as LGBTQ. We simply ask if they have an employee resource group, and that would kind of make that firm, more of an advocate than a firm that didn't have that group. Because a lot of these identities are self-identified. Like, some people who are veterans want to be identified as a veteran, some don't. Some people who are working caregivers want to be identified and affiliated with a caregiver special interest group, others don't. So it starts to get into that self-identity type of space, and that's why we will probably take the ERG indicator of diversity and include that in the diversity pillar, if you will, but primarily focus for measurable results on the advancement of ethnic minorities. And then the final pillar would be looking at talent tactics. So you could call these best practices, but to be perfectly honest, with such chaos right now for the economy, for most of our employers and organizations, there's a lot of uncertainty. That's the only thing we're sure of. We have found that firms in the MOVE project really appreciate super short, super tactical, super practical tips and strategies that they can just use, frankly, without getting permission or without asking for money. And so when we come out with short little tip lists or respond to a firm that has a question about how to do this or that, and we just give them 3 quick tips and we say, you don't have to ask permission and you don't have to ask for money, you can just do this. They are so grateful. So that kind of got us thinking about having a super practical channel, if you will, or pillar that really is geared for talent development HR folks, and to some degree sponsors and mentors who just need those really, really practical things. Um, I mean, even something as simple as, how are we talking? What is the correct language these days for, breastfeeding moms, or whatever the issue might be, things springing off of current events. I mean, things are changing so quickly. The number of questions, the questions rise and pass so quickly that we can't capture them in the annual report. So this would be a chance to have a bit of a channel that's for folks who just need those really practical, very applicable tips and tactics and strategies. And yeah, they like the strategies, they like the big picture, they love that. But where they live is, I need to get this done, and I don't want to have to ask for money because it'll slow it down to the point of irrelevance. And finally, we're considering some additional formats for building community. Um, we are, this is by no means set in stone. We're still committed to working with AFWA and following your lead on the conference and everything. But we, to be honest, haven't really developed social media as a significant channel. And there might be some other ways as well of communicating in smaller groups. There might be opportunities for firms that are similarly situated or that have similar challenges to maybe partner up with an AFWA chapter and just have a one-time discussion about a particular thing. So we just are trying to open up, look at what we had been assuming wouldn't work, and just revisit some of those assumptions. We would deeply appreciate your feedback on these reset points. I just want to be honest with you. We are going to have to get a couple of additional sponsors to be able to pull this off. Any recommendations that you have, we would really appreciate. But the Accounting Move project continues to be a high point in the year for my team that loves talking with women in your profession, understanding the deep drivers of your professional success and accomplishment. That has become part of our professional success and accomplishment. And I know that we'll have a live portion here for some questions. We have some questions teed up, so we will just segue into that.